So my name is Jennifer Sharpie. I am with the Colorado Foundation for Agriculture, and we do the Agriculture in the Classroom program. We help students like you all across Colorado understand their connection to food, fiber, fuel, and natural resources. These things that we rely on every day. We wouldn't be able to, we wouldn't have clothes, we wouldn't be able to go to school, ride in our buses, or have anything to eat without farmers and ranchers and our natural resources. So we're going to learn a little bit about that today. So we've got the Bessie Minor Swift Foundation and the Fence Post News. Both our author and the illustrator of the book both work for the Fence Post. We have the Farm Bureau Women's Leadership Committee, the Colorado Cattlewomen, Bank of America, and then various other sponsors. And let's get to our special guest, Dr. Lora Bledsoe, and I will let her introduce herself and tell you a little bit about herself and her connection to agriculture.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Lora Bledsoe. I am a farm animal veterinarian out in Eastern Colorado. I did not grow up in agriculture, so if some of you guys aren't growing up on a farm or haven't been around farm animals, that's kind of how I was when I was your age. I hadn't been around very many farm animals, maybe at the fair or when we were driving out in the country, or every once in a while I'd get to see a cow or a horse. But I really liked horses growing up and all animals, and I wanted to be a veterinarian one day when I grew up. And so I came out to Colorado to go to college. And while I was at college, I really fell in love with agriculture. And so now I am a veterinarian and I own my own practice, and I see just farm animals all the time. So I really love agriculture and I love everything about the animals and the people. So I'm excited to talk to you guys today and to read the book.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here and for volunteering your time, Dr. Bledsoe. Greatly appreciate it. So Laura's going to read the book, and think as you're listening and seeing the pictures, think about any questions you might have about either the book, topics in the book, things about agriculture, or any questions that you might have for Dr. Lora. We're here to, we'll have a few minutes at the end, and we want to be sure that we answer all of your questions. Oh, let's see. So first, we'll introduce the book. Some of you, if you have it, you can show it to your students as well, but it's called Still Good, The Faces of Family Agriculture. I've got one, I've got mine here as well. It was written by Rachel Gable and then illustrated by Liz, and I don't try to pronounce her last name. So this is a brand new book that we wrote together in a partnership, or worked together on a partnership to it, and it features Colorado farms and ranchers. And what we're going to learn about is a little boy who finds his grandpa's photo album that has photos from like the 1950s. Have any of you seen some of those old photos? Maybe your grandparents or your parents' old photo albums, and you can see those photos, and they're maybe a little, they're faded perhaps, probably in black and white. Several of you got your hands up. That's great. They're maybe not the clearest of photos as you would see today, because technology and photography technology wasn't as advanced back then as it is today. So you're going to see some of that, and they talk about, Grandpa talks about those stories with those photos. And then the boy has this great idea to try and compare how agriculture was 70 years ago to how it is today. And as they can compare and contrast those two eras, they realize that agriculture has changed, but it is in fact still good. So let's get started.
Okay. The leather photo album creaked as the boy opened it, sending dust swirling into the light from the attic window. Out in the yard, he could see cattle milling around the pens and the rows of corn dancing in the wind. He flipped to a yellowing page with a black and white photo. Below it, someone had neatly written, "The Boys and Patsy, 1950. He turned to another photo and another before deciding he needed to know more. And he knew exactly who would know more. The boy turned the page to a photo of a long...
There we go. Here we go. Sorry about that.
Thank you. He opened the screen door to the farmhouse, and it groaned. He stepped on the porch, and the old dog and the old boards groaned. A quilt flapped in the breeze on the clothesline. The boy sat down on the porch swing beside his grandfather, who was oiling a shovel handle. He looked over and saw the book in the boy's lap. I haven't seen that book for a while, Grandpa said. Farming sure is different now than it was. They opened the book to the photo of the boys and the milk cow. The older boy was hunkered on his little stool, milking a cow. The younger boy had his thumbs hooked in the straps of his overalls, a dog near his feet. Old Patsy, Grandpa said, pulling the book and the boy closer. We always had a milk cow around. She was a shorthorn. I used to weigh every bucket of milk to fill 10-gallon cans. We would sell those cans, and my dad would give me a few cents from the milk check. That was back when even a few cents could buy something. The boy turned the page to the photo of a long-legged boy standing next to a man with a weathered hat in front of an old tractor. Grandpa looked at the photo and leaned back in his chair. That old tractor could really run, he said. It was hot on that metal seat in the summer, and there was no heat when it was cold. That tractor is still out in the barn. Maybe I'll teach you to drive it sometime. They sure could build things to last. The next photo was of a young boy standing proudly next to a steer. Grandpa studied the photo and sat back in his chair, tipping his straw hat back on his head and taking a long drink of tea. At his feet, the dog sighed. That boy, not much older than you, was me, he said. I took that Hereford steer to the fair and won a blue ribbon. That fall, I led the steer down the alley at the Denver Union Stockyards. The buyer would sit on the wood fence rails that lined the alleys. I stood up straight and led that steer, hoping those buyers would bid. I couldn't understand the auctioneer's chant. That's what they call it when they talk so quickly. But they sure seemed to. Grandpa turned another page to the photo of a young woman in a dress behind rows of pumpkins and baskets filled with apples, zucchini, potatoes, onions, watermelons, and peppers. This is your grandma when she was young, he said. Her dad farmed, and it took him and the boys all summer to irrigate those produce. It was like watering our garden, but they did it for entire fields. Each morning, your grandma would drive the old pickup to the farm stand where she would sell the produce that they grew. That's where I met her. I ate a lot of vegetables that summer, looking for excuses to see her. He paused and smiled at the photo. This was back when farmers irrigated with shovels and set tubes by hand, he said. There were no pivot sprinklers. It was back when irrigating was a full-time job all by itself. You couldn't buy fruits and vegetables all the time you wanted, anytime you wanted. They were available when they were in season, and people stored them in root cellars or put them up in glass canning jars, like Grandma does with her dilled green beans and jellies. The boy smiled at the mention of Grandma's jars of green beans. They were his favorite. He turned the page. The photo was of a young man trailing sheep through a small town. A horse pulled a round-topped herder's wagon behind the ewes, and the dogs and kids on horseback were on all sides. That family has been raising sheep near Meeker for nearly 100 years, he said. They took them high in the summer and brought them back down in the fall. Herders stayed with the sheep and protected them from bears, wolves, mountain lions, and kept them together and safe. It takes a lot of work to raise lambs, but I'm glad people still do it. The boy thought about the wool socks in winter and Grandma's lamb chops at Easter. Me too, said the boy. We brought a lamb from them every year for as long as I can remember, Grandpa said. We always knew where our meat came from, raised either on our farm or a neighbor's. When this photo was taken, there weren't refrigerated trucks to haul meat across the country. The next photo was a handsome young man standing next beside a small airplane. Who is that, Grandpa? Well, son, that's me, he said. You were a pilot? The boy was sitting up straight now, eager to hear more. Grandpa scratched the dog that was now inching closer to him in search of a cool breeze. Yep, he said. You know how the yellow airplanes spray the neighbor's field? The boys nodded. Well, I used to do that, he said. I'd fly low, buzzing the fields for farmers who had hired me. I learned to fly in the war, so when I came home, I figured out a way to get back in the air. It was dangerous, and it still is, but it was a thrill and an important job. When I flew near our farm, I would waggle my wings back and forth to say hello to your grandma. As summer turned to fall, the boy returned to school, though he thought he would learn more on the porch with Grandpa and helping water the garden and fixing the old tractor and checking the cows than he did at a desk. The boy asked to borrow the leather book, and he carried it home carefully, protecting it like it contained treasures, and knowing it did indeed. As he stepped into his own house, he had an idea. After school, the boy did his chores, ate dinner, and then sat at the kitchen table, neatly writing letters and folding them into envelopes, which he put in the mailbox at the end of the drive as he waited for the bus. Each day, as he hustled off the school bus and checked the mailbox, he flipped through the bills and catalogs for seeds, bulls, and tractors. Finally, one day, there was an envelope with his name on it. 5 more envelopes slowly arrived. As he sat at the kitchen table with the leather book open and slowly worked as his mother moved about the kitchen and as the Agnews played on the television. It was Friday when he carried the leather album down the driveway to his grandpa's porch. A quilt was drying on the line, dancing as the wind blew it. The dog and the old man stood and watched the boy run towards them. He bounded up the stairs and held the leather book out to his grandpa. "Take a look," he told Grandpa, his heart beating fast from running and anticipation. Grandpa opened the book and saw again the photo of the 2 boys and a roan milk cow. On the facing page, the boy had carefully placed a color photo of Holstein cows in a spotless milking barn. The stainless steel gleamed, and 2 men walked alongside the cows, ensuring that the robotic milker cups attached correctly. "Well, I'll be," Grandpa said, studying the photos. "Where did you find this?" "I wrote a letter to the family who owns Chapin Farm Dairies, asking for a photo of them milking cows," he said. "Mr. Chapin told me that the robots milk the cows and test the milk, and that they're able to safely milk more cows and make sure the milk is clean and the cows feel good. It only takes a few people to milk a lot of cows." "Robots, I'll be darned," Grandpa said. "They even have a robot to push the feed closer to the cow so it's always there and fresh. A big tanker picks up the milk every day," the boy said. "Dairy farming is different now than it was when you milked Patsy, but it's still good." Grandpa turned the page to the photo of the long-legged boy standing by the tractor. On the facing page were 2 men, father and son, in front of a combine and tractor hooked to a disc. Behind them, Grandpa could see a center pivot sprinkler against the blue sky. "That is Mark Arnish and his dad," the boy said. "They came from Germany to grow sugar beets in 1951, but now they grow wheat, and they have a 3rd generation working with them too." Grandpa held the book close, studying the modern combine and tractor, and he smiled when he looked back to the black and white photo, remembering the little red tractor. "Much different than what we had," he said. "Different, but still good." The next page was a photo of Grandpa as a boy and his Hereford steer. Next to it, the boy had taped a photo of an auctioneer in a crisp shirt and an evenly creased hat, leaning close to a microphone with his hand pointing to the crowd, calling bids. In the ring was a fancy set of Hereford heifers. Next to the auctioneer sat 2 people with cell phones and computer screens in front of them. "Ms. Robin at Livestock Exchange sent me this photo when I wrote to her," the boy said. He pointed to the computer. "That's how people at home can buy cattle on their computer or phone," he said. Grandpa grinned and said that he never heard of such a thing. "They still chant and take bids, and Mrs. Robin said they serve cherry pie and it's really good," the boy said. Grandpa smiled when he turned the page to a photo of Grandma as a girl. Next to it was a photo of a young woman in shorts and a t-shirt, leaning on a crate of cantaloupes. "That's Gail Knapp's sent me this photo," the boy said. "They've been selling produce at their farm stand for over 30 years. Their melons are trucked to grocery stores in several states because they produce more than they can sell at their stand. Not everyone who wants to buy their produce can come to their farm. They have Rocky Ford cantaloupes and watermelon, peppers that tumble in the roaster over the flame, sweet corn, okra, onions, potatoes, peaches, and jars of apple butter. Mrs. Knapp said the apple butter they sell is made exactly to my grandma's famous recipe, and it's the best around." They both knew that it was one of those things that hadn't changed and was still good. On the last page was the photo of a sheep trotting towards town. On the facing page was a new color photo of a young boy following the sheep through the same small town. That is Ari Theos, the boy said. He's the 5th generation of sheep producers on their ranch. They still trail ewes like they did when his grandpa was his age. Some things only change a little and are still good. Grandpa smiled and sat back in his chair with a leather book closed on his lap. Together, the two looked over the farm and thought of the farms just beyond their view, with pivot irrigation, big tractors, and the setting sun, knowing it was different, but still good. The end.